Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the special meeting of the Pensions Committee and Pensions Board within Grangemouth Education Unit. In accordance with Section 43 of the Local in Scotland Act 2003, I have directed that the meeting will be conducted in such a manner as to allow remote attendance by members. It will also be live streamed at www.falkirk.gov.uk live and thereafter on the Falkirk Council YouTube channel. I also would like to welcome Ross Mackenzie. I believe it's his first time here at the committee. He's a board member and he's from the Scottish Children's Reporter. Thank you for attending, and thank you everyone else for attending. So I'm now going to open the meeting formally, start the business. First on the agenda is apologies. Mr. Peary, do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, we've got two apologies, one from Douglas McNaughton and one from Nicola Griffin. Thank
you. Two declarations of interest. Members should declare any financial, non-financial they have in any item of business, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of interest. No, that's fine. We'll now go into the main bulk of the meeting, which is the unaudited annual report and accounts 2022 and 2023. And I believe Amanda Templeman, our Chief Finance Officer for Falkirk Council, will be taking this report and accounts. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, everyone. So the purpose of the meeting today is to ask the committee to consider the unaudited accounts. The accounts are subject to the Local Authority Accounts Regulations 2014, and those regulations are very prescriptive in terms of the timescales for completion and consideration of the unaudited accounts. The regulations state that the accounts must be submitted to the external auditor by the 30th of June and must be published on the website from the date that they're submitted. A local authority or a committee of that authority whose remit includes audit or governance functions must meet to consider the accounts as submitted to the auditor by the 31st of August. And there's also the requirement to notify the public that the accounts are available for inspection, and that inspection period must last for 3 weeks. And in our case, the inspection period ran from the 29th of June to the 19th of July. The public have the option to make an objection to the accounts at that point, and they would submit that to our auditors, Audit Scotland, but no objections were lodged this year. The pension fund accounts were submitted, published and advertised in accordance with the regulations, and this meeting fulfils the requirements for consideration of the unaudited accounts by the 31st of August. The covering report on page 4 of the agenda pulls out some of the key messages. From page 3 of the agenda, pulls out some of the key messages from the annual accounts. The accounts themselves are very complex and they can be quite difficult to navigate, and there's a huge amount of information in them. So the management commentary and the associated report sections, the governance statements, those should sort of highlight all the significant activity and information of the accounts in a more user-friendly and accessible way. The management commentary itself provides information on how the fund operates and some of the more significant governance-related issues. And Catherine has prepared a lot of reports during the year to committee and board on her general governance matters report, so a lot of the information that's in there will already be familiar to the committee and the board. The fund governance itself is set out on page 26 of the agenda, and that includes a register of the committee and board members and a notice of the attendance at meetings, and it also notes training sessions that were available during the financial year. If I turn to page 33 of the agenda, this covers the actuarial update, and members will be aware that the triennial valuation is currently underway. Now that's a very large piece of work that will be reported back to committee, and that work will then inform contribution rates to be paid by employers in the coming years. So the funding information that's available here is from the annual estimate work that's undertaken, and that's less detailed and less bespoke than the 3-yearly valuation. So the 3-yearly valuation is really critical to understanding the position of the fund. When we're looking at valuation data, we need to look at it with some caution because it's based at a point in time. And as we've seen during 22-23, there can be movements in the market that have a big impact on these figures, albeit the type of sort of seismic shift that we saw during 22-23 is relatively rare. However, at this point in time, the current estimate is that the fund is 132% funded. And whilst that's positive, it is important that the committee understand that doesn't mean that the fund already has all the money now that will be needed to fund future benefits. It means that if we get the investment returns that we anticipate, then on balance, we should have enough funds. The funding estimate suggests that there's an 89% likelihood of achieving the assumed level of investment return that would allow the fund to be 100% funded. And some of that information is set out, as I say, on page 33, but it's also further explored in the Hyman's funding update as at the 31st of March 23, which is included as Appendix 2 to the accounts, and that starts on page 147 of the agenda. So the chart at the bottom of page 149, which is within that appendix, shows how the assumed future investment return would impact on the funding levels. So you can see the funding levels on the left-hand side of the chart, and the assumed future investment return is at the bottom of the chart. So it's worth noting that alongside the estimate of the future funding level, that takes into account the projected increase in the future benefits payments that would be due to inflationary increases. And again, you can see that on the chart on page 148 of the agenda, and that shows the 2020 valuation. So that was our last big valuation. That shows our assumptions as a dotted pink line against the current estimates, which are the blue bars. So you can see that our estimates have increased from that 2020 valuation. If I turn back to the accounts themselves, the financial performance in terms of benefits, administration costs, oversight and governance costs and investment management costs are shown on page 36 of the agenda, and the main variances are shown on page 37. And it's notable that there were underspends against each category, underspends against the budget for 22-23. There is some key information on scheme administration, including some performance statistics on page 40 of the agenda. And there's further information on benchmarking on investment costs and administration costs on pages 43 and 44. And again, further performance information on page 48 of the agenda, and that's showing completion rates and timescales for a number of the sort of standard transactions that are undertaken by the pensions team. And I think those statistics demonstrate the significant volume of work that the pensions team are dealing with, and a lot of those volumes have increased significantly over the last few years. If I turn to investments, there's a large amount of information in the accounts on investments, and much of that will already be familiar to the committee and board through the regular updates that you receive. Paragraph 5.3.1 of the covering report on page 5 sets out the investment return information, and that highlights a one-year return of 0.8% against a benchmark of a negative 12% in 22-23. The benchmarks for the other periods, which are 3-year, 5-year and since inception, are also above benchmark, and that provides some reassurance for us that the investment strategy is performing well, particularly over a long-term, from a long-term perspective. And there's lots more detailed information on investments on page 51 of the agenda, with investment performance shown in detail from page 61. But there is agreement amongst market commentators that there's still significant uncertainty in the market. Inflation is reducing, but core inflation appears persistent, and so bank rates are expected to continue to rise before falling back again. And given the volatility of the previous year and the difficulties in getting inflation under control, there does remain a lot of uncertainty in the system. Information on responsible investment is set out from page 70, and again, much of this information will be familiar to the committee and the board through the regular reports received on voting and engagement activity, particularly through Hermes EOS. And on page 79 of the agenda, within the management commentary to the accounts, the approach to risk management is set out, with the most significant risks to the fund listed alongside the mitigating actions. And we also note the ongoing and increasing concern around cyber risk, again noting the mitigation actions that we are taking. The increased risk due to the economic volatility is also highlighted. Two key statements in the accounts are on pages 94 and 95 of the agenda, and that is the pension fund account and the net assets statement respectively. And these statements show closing net assets as at 31st of March 2023 of 3.195 billion. The annual governance statement is on page 130 of the agenda, and the committee is asked to consider this report separately to the accounts. And this document provides some information on the governance framework, responsibilities and controls in place in respect of the various pension fund activities. The governance statement seeks to provide reassurance on the controls in place and notes on page 133 the work of internal audit and the substantial assurance provided during 22-23. And committee received the internal audit assurance statement at its meeting in June earlier this year. The annual governance statement is supported by the governance compliance statement on page 137 of the agenda, and that assesses the fund's compliance with the best practice principles as set out in the SPPA best practice guidelines. So at this stage, the audit process is underway, and it is expected that the the audited accounts will come to the committee in November this year. That's slightly later than we would normally expect. It would usually be by the 30th of September. This is the first year of the audit rotation, and we're seeing nationally that a lot of the audits are finishing a little bit later than the standard deadlines. But the expectation is that next year we'll start to get closer to the standard cycle. And then finally, I would just like to thank Catherine, Justina and the wider team for all their hard work in pulling these accounts together. There's a huge amount of information in these accounts, and there's a huge amount of work involved in collating and pulling together all that information. And the team have done a really great job in pulling it together and meeting all the required timescales, and so I'm very grateful to them for that. And thank you, convener. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Amanda. What I'll do now is I'll open it up for pertinent questions or comments, but bear in mind what Mr. Peary said at the beginning of the meeting. Thank you. Councillor Steinbank.
Yeah, thanks, convener. And it's just a point of clarity. It's on page 21 of the agenda, in which we've got some information on the expected solution to the MacLeod opinion and subsequently what we're going to do with that. I just want some clarity on whether the 13 million referred to at the bottom in both resource and liability costs is reported in these accounts, or whether we'll anticipate those to come once the actual expected anticipated solution is put in place.
Thank you, Councillor Steenbank. I'll let Catherine Crothers answer that question for you, because it was discussed earlier. Thank you. Yeah. Check the page. Did you say 23?
It's 21, sorry.
21. Okay, I'm not seeing the numbers you're quoting, but to put it in context with the MacLeod, the costs that we have estimated are based on an estimate of the number of hours that was worked out with the actuary that would take us to actually implement the actual solution. For the majority of employers, we have yet to do that, and that is because our largest population lies with our 3 largest employers who have yet to submit data to us to enable us to start that implementation process. For the smaller employers where we've had the data, we have done the implementation that's required. On the other side of that, we have systems implementation. The systems implementation is at phase 2 of phase 4. Phase 3 and 4 are all lined up to go on board, but the software provider, having once been bitten, is extremely shy to switch on and finalise those solutions until the actual final amending regulations are laid. Now, those regulations are due to come into force on the 1st of October and yet have to be made. So we've seen them, but they're not in force as yet.
So just for clarity, the additional liabilities, it's page 23 of the agenda I was referring to. I'm not sure if that's the same as the report.
Got it, yeah.
So that's not included within the liabilities stated in these accounts?
I think account has been taken into account, but it's been on a prescribed basis, that basis being prescribed by the Scottish Public Pensions Agency.
That's great. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Convener.
I have a question actually. It's on page 10 to 79 of the annual report and accounts. And it's to Amanda. Is the Chief Finance Officer satisfied the management commentary accurately reflects Falkirk Council Pension Fund management in 2022-23?
Thank you, Convener. I am satisfied. I think there's been the management commentary for the pension fund accounts is quite a different beast to the one for the council's accounts, and there's a huge amount of information in there. And so I think it is a very thorough and detailed piece of work. I think it sets out all the key factors that the committee and the board need to be aware of, and I've tried to highlight some of those in terms of our risk profile, our governance, our budget outturns and our investment returns. So I'm comfortable that it's a good reflection of the pension fund for 22-23.
Thank you, Amanda. I have 2 other questions. For the members on page 122, 128 of the annual reports and accounts. Is the Chief Finance Officer satisfied that Falkirk Council Pension Fund's annual governance statement properly reflects the risk environment and the actions which are deemed required to improve it?
Thank you, Convener. So the annual governance statement, I think, as I said earlier, should be familiar to members because it should reflect much of the information that's been provided, particularly through the audit work, the internal audit work, where, as I said, that they had provided substantial assurance and no significant risks have been highlighted. We are very conscious, particularly of our cybersecurity work, and we know that there was pensions committee considered the updated business continuity planning arrangements that was reported to committee earlier this year, and so I'm comfortable that what's in the annual governance statement reflects what we understand from our internal auditors, but also what we are aware of through the ongoing work that we are doing to look at our standard governance controls and our internal financial controls and things like that. So yes, I'm comfortable that the annual governance statement reflects the position. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I'm sure the members do too. I just have one more question, and I'll give members just a few seconds or a minute. It's on page 129 to 133 of the annual report and accounts. And the question is the Chief Finance Officer satisfied that Falkirk Council Pension Fund demonstrates how governance will support the achievement of the administering authority's objectives?
Thank you, Convener. I think the key document is probably the governance compliance statement, which starts off on page 137, and that is an assessment that's done against all the best practice principles, which are in the SPP best practice guidelines. And if I look through those, there is one requirement where we have noted ourselves, well, there's two requirements where we've noted ourselves as not compliant. One, because it's no longer relevant, and the other one is that there's no independent professional observers of committee or board business. And at this point, we don't consider that that's an issue. We feel that in terms of on page 138, there's the mitigations that are in place, the arrangements in place. So we have a good diversity of attendance at the committee and the board. We have the joint investment strategy panel where we have independent advisors. We have our audit process, and we also have our professional advisors that come to our committee and board meetings. So that's the only area that we've marked as non-compliant, but we feel that there's enough mitigation that is not an issue. Beyond that, I think that our governance does reflect, I think our governance is quite solid, and I think our governance will help us to deliver the objectives of the pension fund. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll ask a question. So do we have any final questions at all, or statements, or no? So the recommendations are the Pensions Committee and Pension Board is asked to consider and comment on the unaudited annual report and accounts for 2022-23 Falkirk Council Pension Fund. And 2.2, the Pensions Committee is asked to approve the fund annual governance statement. Do we agree? Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank everybody for coming along today. It was a special meeting of the unaudited annual report and accounts. Well, it wouldn't be next meeting, but it'll be a meeting later on that will have the audited accounts available for us, and then perhaps there might be more questions and comments then. But I want to thank you all for coming along and paying attention, and I also want to echo what Catherine said about these accounts, because I spoke to Catherine Justina, and they were telling me that it took actually nearly 3 months full-time work to actually prepare them and document them for us. So I want to thank them for all their hard work. So our next meeting will be on the 21st of September, and I hope to see you all then. Thank you again. End of meeting now.
Thank
End
you,
of
convener.
business.
Thank you. Bye-bye.